Not a good look for our profession.
How in the name of common sense did this ever get this far? Vaccines are not seek and destroy missions.
Because he was so severe.
This is nuts.
One of the top 20 things that she has discovered with her research company, Progenobiome, medicine has been corrupted. Where we go from here now, I don't know. Well, it doesn't work.
So angry, punishable with jail time.
Literally, this makes me believe we live in the Matrix. Like,
Deadliest year in U.S. history.
It wasn't a question of if, but when.
The first red.
if it doesn't work and it's safe, put it in a little Fauci Pez dispenser, give it to the patient, and shut the family up.
It's going to get worse and worse and worse.
Gave Fauci an award for being a hero of the pandemic.
This has been a problem.
These were lies.
Let's talk about the healthcare professionals supporting this.
In the meantime, what was going on behind the scenes?
Irony of the whole thing is,
Harvey's 100% correct.
This is freaking annoying.
ultimately we need to have hope for America.
What is going on here? What has poisoned your mind? Buckle up, kids.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And today we have an incredible guest with us who's been at the forefront of medical research, innovation, and advocacy. With a background in infectious disease, she's now dedicated to clinical research, holding multiple patents and developing groundbreaking therapeutics, but also as a founding member of the Global COVID Summit and America's Frontline Doctors. She's been a key voice in the movement for medical freedom and transparency in healthcare. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Lynn Fynn with us today to talk about the future of patient-centered care, the challenges of navigating medical misinformation, and what's next in the fight for medical autonomy, and maybe a few other things sprinkled in there. So welcome, Dr. Fynn. Let's dive in and get to it.
Thanks for having me. Let's dive in.
You bet. So how did you get to this place? All of us have different stories as far as COVID and coming awake and aha moments and so forth. As an infectious disease person, the pandemic would be like, okay, this is Normandy kind of deal. How did you come to the realization of what in the world is going on? This is not.
It was so bizarre. I really thought, oh, I can clear this up. Don't worry. I got this. And basically who I've looked to, Knut Witowski, as well as Anders Tegnell in Sweden, we were all on the same page. All of us were on the same page. We're like, it's a single-stranded RNA virus. Not a big deal. Yes, it's chimeric. Yes, it was probably engineered, but it's nothing we can't handle. And I think the best way to deal with this would be to clearly let it cycle through the healthy population and it'll go away. Just like SARS-1 did the exact same thing. And there's even cross-reactive immunity for those who were exposed to SARS-1 to SARS-2. So it just made perfect sense to me. That was the way we should handle it. But I saw what alarmed me because it was scarily similar to HIV in the 80s. And I said, this isn't good. I really went deep down. I started a war room at home. My husband's a biochemist. We broke down the entire genome, what the binding sites would be, what kind of compounds would interfere with binding, how we can treat this with what we have on hand. And I was successful in doing so. So I became pretty outspoken about it just to help everybody out and say, hey, it's not a big deal. We have this and this that could take care of it. For the inflammatory state, we have steroids. For all the different phases of a typical RNA viral infection, we can mitigate the problems here. But then when the agencies came out and said, look, you need to basically, I've got to get my Frenchie who's drinking her water quite loudly and snorts to get out of here.
She's welcome to the show as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, she'll snort for you. She'll tell you what she's got, what's on her mind. But what I was saying was when they said, go shut down your primary care clinics, shut down everything, go home until you can't breathe, and then go to the ER. I thought to myself, in what world are we allowing an infection to advance to a stage where it requires emergency care? And we think this is appropriate. This doesn't make any sense. And the louder I got in saying, look, we can mitigate this. This is how to do it. And then the odd, odd pushback I got and the, reprimanding, the threat, the violent threats, even on, at that time, Twitter, I would get death threats in my DMs. And I'm like, what is wrong with people? The whole thing stunk to me. And then when I saw the different state governments and how they responded, and then our national government, and then globally what was going on, and how Anders in Sweden was getting completely wrecked for doing the right thing, I said, something is up. And the more I dug, the more I realized this was an entire process that they practice, and that Operation Lockstep is a thing. Everybody was in lockstep. I exposed Event 201, which was practiced right before in October 16th, 17th, and 18th. They ran through practice sessions on what to do, the whole 6 feet apart and masking and all these things that have never, ever been effective. And I said, something is really up. And I couldn't stay silent. I just couldn't. And the more I spoke, the more trouble I got in. It was unbelievable. And that's when I realized we were really under a psyop. We weren't really under a true mitigating measure for public health. Public health became more of a weapon at that point, and I knew something was up when they're offering free French fries and Krispy Kreme donuts to fall in line and be one of the test subjects. It just didn't make sense to me, and I had to speak out. And when a group of us with America's Frontline doctors came out in different specialties and said, look, we can do this from the psychological aspect. Look, we can do this from the upper respiratory, lower respiratory aspect, from the inflammatory aspect, from the replication aspect. Everybody had a say in how to take care of this with no problem. And we were smeared, attacked, lambasted, you name it. And that's when I realized we were the enemy. We weren't actually helping like we thought we were. We thought it was an easy fix and we can help, but it turned into World War III.
Yeah. And since when does debating therapies get you death threats?
Honestly,
we-
come to me with some supportive evidence why what I'm saying is not factual, and I'll just discuss it with you. This is what scientific discourse has always been about. We discuss our opposition, we discuss our thoughts, our opinions, and try to work it out with what science we have and what knowledge we have. But it turned into a huge fight. And I said, this isn't right. And then they shut us down. Then I got banned. Then I was banned again. Then I was banned again. For a total of 10 times, I was banned on Twitter. And it wasn't until when Elon Musk bought Twitter and came back to the scene and realized that so many people were shut down with the Twitter files and the censorship targets that I got 5 of my accounts back. I still have 5 that are banned in perpetuity, but I got 5 of them back. And the reason why it was important for me to get them back is because all the research I did early on in these 25-part threads, I didn't have access to them when I was banned. Nobody but the intelligence agency had access to them. And how do I know that? Because I was contacted by an intelligence agency who read me my tweet. So they clearly had access to what I was saying, but I didn't. So that was a huge problem. And all of that was turned around when Elon came back to the scene.
No, I have texted several of my friends in the medical freedom movement, and I said, look, when they crack the code to the FDA and the CDC and the NIH, the corruption's going to be far more than anyone has possibly imagined. Because this hasn't been going on for 4 years. This has been going on
45.
Yeah, that's exactly.
At least 45.
When
Fauci took the helm, he basically, when he said, I am the science, he truly believed that in a narcissistic manner. He took over science. He held the purse strings. He held all of the scientific organizations, all of our agencies. He decided what funds went where. So they did his bidding. And even grants, where they went and why they went there, went through him first. And I saw this Act 1 in the 80s. And what occurred in the past 5 years was Act 2.
I was just going to say, so you were practicing infectious disease and then went into clinical research afterwards, correct?
I actually moonlighted in clinical research throughout medical school, so it was always a love for me. But I really love dealing with patients, and I spent a lot of time in West Africa, and I love dealing with tropical medicine and people. But when I saw where things were going, I started focusing more on clinical research because so much of the research out there was wrong. And every day I'm proving it's wrong. In fact, one of my latest discoveries will change textbooks. And I'm not at liberty to talk about it, but you'll soon hear about it. But it will change textbooks. It'll change thousands of publications that were published inaccurately based on the wrong premise. And a lot of what we're seeing now is based on a premise that many assume to be correct. Just like back in the day when Carrie Mullis went around asking, hey, so you're saying in the beginning of your paper that HIV is a causative agent for AIDS, that is causative for AIDS. Where is the science behind that? Where's the paper that proves that? And he literally got things like, it's out there, of course. It's well-known fact. It's in
Right.
textbooks. And he goes, yeah, but there's got to be like a pivotal paper that says, that proves that HIV, the virus, the retrovirus, is the causative agent for AIDS, for the syndromes of AIDS. So where is that paper? No one could produce it. So it's based on kind of the similar thing. The more we dug into certain ideas that were considered fact, the more we couldn't find the origins of these facts. And that really appealed to me on the research end. It was like, okay, I really want to get into research that is considered factual and try to dig into them, find out, are they really factual? Because that's what the whole peer review process was supposed to be, right? They show all the methodologies, pretty much everything in the paper that would allow a team of scientists to go to the bench and reproduce all of that data. That was the point of peer review. But they didn't do that anymore. It became panel review. Well, that's my
Right.
buddy. He's great. Everything he writes is awesome. Let's pass it. Or, oh, they're saying something that's against the narrative. We're going to have to question this. And that's the conundrum I found myself in. That's not what this is supposed to be. And that's what
Well,
drew me more to clinical research.
Interesting.
yeah. And that's what drives me crazy about, honestly, infectious disease, because, okay, now we're in this respiratory season. That's the worst respiratory season since whatever. So we see tons and tons of people, and I spend lots of my time trying graciously to say, look, you're going to cough for a month because that's what this does. It makes you're going to get a sore throat, a runny nose, maybe a fever, and you're going to cough for a long time. And you don't need anything for that. It's a self-limited illness. If you get a secondary pneumonia, we'll treat you, steroids, et cetera, all the usual
And very
stuff.
prevalent mycoplasma, which has to be
Yes.
Which I want to get into because there's a reason people want Z-Packs, and it's not just because they want their own way. I think that there's another story going on there. But it's fascinating that I think that we have now, I think we had a pretty bad underlying assumption when it came to infectious disease, which is all infectious diseases are bad. They aren't necessarily bad. Some are
They're not.
self-limited and probably are helpful because they stimulate your immune system. You get 10% of the country has an upper respiratory tract infection at one time. You have everyone's interferons are going. It helps prevent other worse viruses from propagating. What's like this viral displacement theory. So this idea that we have to seek and destroy every single freaking infectious disease is just insane. But that is the underlying assumption for why you have 72 or 100, if you include COVID, vaccines for kids, because self-limited childhood illnesses are now super deadly. 24 kids get a measles outbreak and they lose their marbles.
It was
And I'm
a
like-
Brady Bunch thing. Got the measles. Hey,
Yeah.
up your vitamin A. You'll be fine.
No, exactly. And I read a stat. I couldn't believe it. I went to the CDC to confirm it. I saw it in a Substack. At the end of last week, so the week that ended February 8th, there was 50,000 people admitted to the hospital with influenza. 50,000. Okay. So that's really significant. That's not 50,000 cases. That's hospital admissions. Yet
Right.
they absolutely lost their shit and wanted to pole axe Joe Latipo because 8 kids last year got measles in Fort Lauderdale. And I'm like, are you kidding me?
You look at all of the data, and once we had proper sanitation, proper diet, learned about vitamin D and all that good stuff, we found that these once detrimental diseases are clearly not. They're not. Measles is not detrimental. Pertussis can be nasty. It doesn't have to kill you. Chickenpox, are you kidding me? Why are we doing this? The risk benefit assumption has gone out the window for all of these childhood illnesses because rather than go through them and confer complete immunity, we're shooting these kids up full of adjuvants and other things that actually suppress your immunity and only attack a small portion of that particular illness that would be totally fine otherwise and would probably be limiting in the population because once you confer herd immunity, the thing basically goes away. But what happens when you have some leaky garbage vaccine that suppresses your overall immunity? You become what's the word I'm using? Basically susceptible to anything out there. And all of a sudden you see other illnesses pop up that didn't need to. And what do they want to do? They want to vaccinate against that too. So it just becomes this awful circle that doesn't need to be. I think the entire childhood schedule should be reevaluated. Is this deadly? Or are they just going to be uncomfortable for a few days? If it's just a matter of they're going to be uncomfortable for a few days, take it off. Why are we doing this in a baby? Why are we doing this? And if it's deadly, then maybe look at the true data. Is it lowering symptom severity? Is it preventing spread or transmission?
So
You'll find a lot do not.
a lot of our listeners, being non-medical people and patient-based, they're going to be saying, wow, okay, you're an infectious disease specialist and in research, and this is what you're saying. Yet I go to my pediatrician and they look at me like I'm an
You're the
idiot,
devil.
that I would want to put my child at risk by not giving them these life-saving vaccines. So where's the dichotomy? I can kind of guess, but I want you to say who's not pushing it, but is it coming from one college, like the College of Pediatrics versus infectious disease? Like I
Not
don't
just
hear about the infectious
pediatrics.
disease speaking up a lot about it, but maybe I'm missing something.
No, you're not really missing anything. Most infectious disease physicians, their goal is to prevent infectious disease. That's their
Right.
goal. I have a different take on it. Mine isn't necessarily to prevent infectious disease. Mine is to treat the whole patient and hopefully find ways for that infectious disease to be self-limiting. To me, adding to the schedule without proper studies of these combinations and what they do to the human, it is an issue for me. When I see data that is so severely lacking, I can't get behind something. But when medicine is so incentivized, when pediatricians are paid based on the number of vaccines they provide to their practice, then there enters in a bias that they can say isn't there, but it is there. And just like the past 5 years of incentivizing a whole pandemic, that changes your whole protocol and your mindset when you're practicing in a patient. You're looking at more of a group. This is how I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it based on these guidelines. And I'm going to reach this milestone and this threshold so I can get paid this. And oh, don't worry, they said it's good. This is what I'm supposed to do. And that's not always the case. And I think more discerning practitioners will say, wait a minute. And they'll back up and say, do I really need to give all of these on this day in this infant with it when there's a potential history of this or hyperinflammation in an infant with a developing brain? Is that a good idea? That to me, for the sake of preventing measles or for the sake of preventing chickenpox, just doesn't make sense to me because these injections are not without risk.
That's not how they're selling them, are they?
No, that is not how they're selling them. They're safe
Well,
and
no,
effective, safe and effective, safe and
Yep.
effective.
No, but anytime anyone speaks, we just finished another interview with a fabulous guest, and it was the whole anybody that has absolute certainty, like I immediately know they're full of shit.
Exactly. You
haven't
can't.
ab-
This is my favorite absolute certainty. I don't know what caused this, but I know it wasn't the vaccine. So that kind of certainty is repeated. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I'm like, you just contradicted yourself. You don't know. You don't know.
No,
Yep, we saw it, and you see it like all the time when we were working in the COVID clinics doing the frontline stuff. And then we had some colleagues that would come forward too, and they'd be like, man, I just did a rotation through OB, and all of a sudden, all these women are having spontaneous abortions 2 weeks after they get this jab. And I asked the doc, the only thing different is that, oh, I don't know what it was, but it couldn't be that because
ACOG said so.
Yeah. No, it's like my already oversized head explodes when I meet other physicians just randomly. I met this OBGYN in the airport in Norfolk, Virginia. And she told me every single disease that we've eliminated was eliminated because of a vaccine. Every single infectious disease.
Everyone, huh?
Everyone. Smallpox, polio.
I'll give smallpox some kudos only because it's not a portion of the smallpox that's heat killed with adjuvants that is doing the trick.
Right.
We found cross immunity with cowpox, which is vaccinia, and you're getting vaccinia, which is not a big deal and confers immunity for a big deal, which is smallpox. That is not the same as all the other vaccines on the schedule. That is completely different. So I'll give kudos to smallpox. That was brilliant to recognize that those working with animals, with cows, had conferred immunity against smallpox. Why? Because they were exposed to vaccinia in the cows on a regular basis, and they built antibodies against that, and it was close enough. And that's why that one kind of made sense. But that's not what the rest of these vaccines are.
When you look, I don't know if you're familiar with Peter Abbe and Christine Stable-Ben from, I think, Denmark, the work they did in Guinea-Bissau. And that stuff is brilliant. And the whole concept of the very poor country, tons of overcrowding, very high mortality rate for measles. They started vaccinating there with the old school live measles vaccine, and it worked amazing. And it actually helped confer all-cause mortality benefit. They didn't just not die of measles. They just didn't die of other infectious diseases, suggesting or proving that vaccines have downstream consequences that aren't
That's
just
right.
preventing the disease.
Absolutely.
And I saw Peter speak on, I don't know how I found it on the internet. And we have to get away from a seek and destroy mission on infectious disease and understand our goal. Our goal is to have the most robust and healthy immune system.
Period.
Whatever that means. And they found 3 vaccines that conferred all-cause mortality benefit: live measles, live polio, and BCG, none of which are on the pediatric vaccine schedule. They're all long gone. Because what we did is we added...
We improved.
Yeah. New and improved tide. Yes.
They keep improving, which is why there are 77 mRNA vaccines in trial right now. Those are going to replace the previous ones. Improvement.
No, it's amazing. So let's switch gears a little bit, because we were both at a conference and you spoke about the RSV vaccine, which has driven me completely crazy because it's new, it's out there. Patients come in, they have a cold, they're 75 years old, and they're just terrified. They're like, could it be RSV? And I'm like, yeah, so who cares? And I literally
like you never cared for the last 50 years.
Do you have an infant upper respiratory system? Do you have a little bronchioles? Do you have?
And exactly. I'm like, if you're 3 weeks old and you get RSV, I care very deeply about that.
Absolutely.
And I want to know about that. I've taken care of those kids in the ICU. It is not fun. I'm like, dude, you're healthy. You just got off the pickleball court. You got the syphilis. It doesn't matter what it is, right? And then I say this. I say, isn't it interesting that you would have never asked this question until they started advertising the vaccine?
That's right.
And then their eyes go and they start smiling and they're like, yeah, I just got duped. So tell us about this 60%, 70% effectiveness or whatever it is about the trials for the RSV vaccine and what it actually means in reality.
even go a step further. I may have highlighted how they did the trials for the RSV vaccine for all of you and for CME students out there to see how it was done statistically. But I've got news for you, because that's how they do all vaccines, which was the reason for the hard push for the genetic therapy to be named a vaccine. So they can also use that sort of statistic of relative risk. But what I was showing you at that particular talk was simply when they say something's 86% efficacious, they have two cohorts of, say, 12,000 people in each cohort that they're studying. And when they chart out their disease prevention, they're charting out the 6 people that got it. And when you look at a chart of placebo versus the 6 people they prevented, boy, that looks pretty amazing. But when you put it on the scale of the true cohort, which is 12,000 plus, it's one solid line, and it's 0.02% delta between the placebo and the actual injection that they're testing, which is statistically insignificant. It's a non-event. There is zero efficacy proven there. But when you look at their graphics and you look at how they register it, it's the total number of exposed. So out of the 12,000 that may have gotten it or been prevented, they showed the 6 compared to placebo. And boy, that looks really compelling. I've got to get on that. Wow. And what's even worse is the mRNA version of the RSV vaccine. They did the same thing. They said it was 67% efficacious. It was not. It was over 12,000 in each cohort, so it was a flat line. But what was even more, what I think scandalous, is that they only followed the AEs for 7 days. And they had over 10,000 reported AEs in that 7-day period. When we know that a universally inflammatory platform like messenger RNA has AEs long beyond the first 7 days, we go into years. But the fact that the first 7 days elicited over 10,000 reportable AEs, and then they stopped, that's not how you run a study.
No, that's amazing. So AEs for our non-medical listeners is adverse events. So
that
yeah, no, that's no problem. But then again, like you said, you nailed it. You said this wasn't just the RSV vaccine, which is new and is being advertised like crazy. It's all of them. The hepatitis B vaccine that's given to infants, the longest
Same
any
thing.
version of that was followed was 7 days.
It's ridiculous.
Right. For a vaccine given at 1 day of life.
For a vaccine, that child has absolutely no risk of contracting the disease.
I don't know. I've had a lot of 2-week-old IV drug users.
Yeah, they're like, I need my crack, man.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, it's ridiculous. And I think it originated with our social justice medicine saying we don't want the drug addicted mothers to be singled out. So we're going to have this blanket guidance for all infants to get a Hep B. When we know when a mother is Hep B positive during prenatal workups, we know when a mom's Hep B positive prior to delivering. So why would we give blanket hepatitis B vaccines in infants of healthy mothers when they have zero risk? And that was another red flag. Why are we doing this? There are more vaccines that are disseminated that way, right? More money,
More
more
money.
vaccines, all of the above for no risk. And they can pat themselves on the back because they didn't make the drug addicted mother feel bad. You
Exactly.
treat the patient based on their own risk.
Yeah, but
the one health, one size fits all is not the way to go. And that's where we're
No, but
headed.
that's where it's all going. That's why I left primary care. I was in leadership for a 7-hospital system. It was on a bunch of quality improvement, pharmacy and therapeutics, done all this stuff
Committed,
because we had a couple insurance companies that we were a part of, credentials committee, which is horrifying. Don't ever go on a credit, especially for insurance companies where you literally have people from potentially all over the state applying for you. That is, if you want to.
Jerry Springer episode.
It is
of
Jerry
that.
Springer.
Yeah, you're not lying.
But I digress. It is, what I did learn is there's a lot of therapists that like to sleep with their patients, but that's
Oh
it.
my.
Yeah, I've seen that myself. I don't
It's,
get it.
it's
But
just,
but God forbid you prescribe ivermectin.
yeah,
Come after you for that. But you're okay
Right.
sleeping.
Yes.
Just
No kidding.
no, it was amazing. When we interviewed Paul Thomas, he lasted 4 days after he wrote his vaccine safe book. And 4 days in the state of Oregon, where we used to live, took his license away. I said, Paul, I only know 2 other physicians that I've actually met personally that have lost their license. One failed meth outpatient treatment 3 times, and the other one was sexually abusing nurses in the closed closet of the dialysis unit. All of this is public, so I'm not disclosing anything. And both of them took years to
Right.
grind through the system to lose their license. Paul took 4 days for not even saying don't get vaccinated, just saying maybe we should do it a different way.
that's what happens when you go against the cult.
Yep. I wrote a Substack about that. I said, I thought diets were culty until I went down the vaccine rabbit hole. And I was like, this is the cultiest von
The
cult.
cultiest of cult.
It is the cultiest of cults. And it's complete like that. When you start to confront people, like I would rather have a conversation with my former neighbors who are truck drivers and loggers. They have more common sense
Right.
than when I sit down with most physicians. We interviewed a guy who wrote a book called They Wanted You Infected, about how letting healthy people get COVID was like monstrous. But
That's
somehow,
what you're supposed to do, especially
Right.
that's why you don't close schools. You let it cycle through the kids because they're healthy and they weren't a demographic that was affected. That would have put an end to it by July.
yeah, no, it wasn't, but it's clearly something. And when you listen to Sasha Latipova, we had her on a couple years ago. This is all the DOD. I mean, this is 100% back to the Department of Defense.
To yourselves, because it's always that, are you going to let your child get long COVID? Are you going to let your child get COVID and people are naive or don't know?
If you want
And
to
if-
let
if
your
you-
child
if-
get long COVID, vaccinate them because it's really
Right,
vaccine
right.
injury for the
Yep.
most part.
It's amazing. So
I don't
what
even
about,
call it a vaccine? I hate calling it a vaccine. It's not a vaccine, but yeah,
what's a gene
Mhm.
therapy?
it's a gene
Pretty-
therapy. Period.
pretty clearly. Just like the first polio virus or polio vaccine ended up being an inadvertent gene there.
Correct. Oops, SV40.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
RSV came from that as well.
Yeah,
Thanks.
talk a little bit about that, because I had read a bit about it and I can't really recall the details, but like how we basically manufactured RSV, right?
Yeah, we did. It was never a thing. It was a chimpanzee virus. And because of the cell lines and the manufacturing of the polio vaccine, it was literally injected into every human till it was adapted in the human host. And that's where it came from. Another
So-
unintended consequence of a vaccine. Yet we're going to vaccinate against that
Oh my
unintended
goodness,
consequence.
yes.
The madness.
And if we but the same damn thing's going to happen with H5N1, with bird flu. If we keep sending a bunch of workers in there, the people that have gotten bird flu in the United States, my understanding is virtually 100% of them were the ones in there culling their herds of chickens. So bird flu is endemic in migratory birds, which means it's going to be endemic in virtually all birds because
There's a recent study where at the University of Minnesota at their raptor center, they went ahead and did serology on all the raptors there, and 70% of them were already immune against bird flu, H5N1. They already had antibodies and they were immune. So it's obviously been present for hundreds of years. We've known about avian influenza. It's been around. There's massive immunity already. Going in and culling flocks is ridiculous. About 30% of them will succumb to the bird flu. About 70% of them won't. And then guess what? Herd immunity. Then the next time they're exposed, about 15% may succumb to it. And then the next time, maybe 5 until it's eradicated. That's what happens when you have complete immunity to something from exposure. Culling herds and culling flocks is not the way, but they're in the zero COVID mindset. You are not going to get rid of them, particularly when the USDA itself did studies in mallards. Mallards are migratory. How are you going to contain the mallards you're doing studies in? They're migratory. It's just going to be everywhere.
No,
Wow.
that's exactly right. And then they bring out this whopper. What if there's human to human spread?
There's
And
none.
there's zero.
Oh.
There's
Zero.
Well, what if it mutates into human to human spread?
It will when they start injecting these chickens
Exactly.
because they're going to create a highly transmissible bug that's going to adapt in humans. They should not be. They just approved a poultry vaccine for H5N1. That's frightening to me. Poultry farmers need to stand up and say no. But the problem is, most of them come from Tyson and Purdue. Most of them come from because big ag, and they're going to do it. So we're in trouble right now because we can't let this happen. This is what's going to make it sustained, transmissible, hyper transmissible, and eventually jump to human. This is what does it.
Right.
You know,
And,
it's
and
human intervention that's causing 100% death in flocks. It's because they're culling them. We wouldn't
Right.
have 100% deaths in flocks otherwise.
but that's the thing. You can't reiterate this enough, which is this whole business of when you have a leaky vaccine, in other words, a vaccine that does not give you absolute immunity and stop transmission, then all you're doing is
Forcing mutation.
you're forcing mutation. And eventually you're going to get a mutation that jumps to humans, that does human to human, that's
Yep.
more virulent, et cetera, et cetera.
They give viruses superpowers, but it's very simple. On the most simplistic level, it just wants to be. It just wants to exist. So it's going to find a way to continue to exist when you don't eradicate it fully. And none of these single-stranded RNA vaccines are eradicate the virus or anything of the sort. It's impossible. They're highly mutagenic, mutative viruses to begin with. They get a small portion, a narrow target, and push it with false evolutionary pressure into another form so it can exist. And part of me, my philosophical end, thinks, wow, if we never, ever had vaccine programs for influenza, would it even be around? Would it even be around? Because that's my quandary. They're not effective vaccines. What, the last one was 15 or 16% supposedly effective? And that's being, as you know, from the statistics, that's being quite generous. What we have found out is it causes immune suppression. The actual vaccine causes immune suppression and makes you more apt to pick up another respiratory virus while you're injected with that within the first 2 weeks of being injected of that vaccine. And if you look at Cochrane studies and all of the data out there, there has been no decrease in hospitalization or death since the vaccine rollout. We're increased in hospitalization and in death. So what is that telling you? Is this successful? What do they consider a successful program when hospitalization and deaths are increased after a vaccine rollout? When there is no proof that vaccinating influenza and healthcare workers is actually beneficial. There's no proof. There's actually proof against it. So why is this mandated in all healthcare workers? Why is it mandated for transplant patients? This is insanity. Now hospitals have taken it part of their policy that when you're admitted for something, no matter what it is, you're getting a flu shot if you didn't get one. Now, how is that benefiting the hospital when it takes at least 2 weeks to elicit a response? How is that going to benefit anything? It's
they're
only
playing.
going to suppress your immune system and make you susceptible to nosocomial infections while in there. I don't understand it. And this is the quandary why I left the whole practice. None of it makes sense to me anymore. And when none of it makes sense to me anymore, either I suck or I can't play along because it doesn't make sense.
No, and I couldn't agree. And again, as we talked about before we hit record, every single week, I see somebody at work that says, I got my updated COVID shot, my RSV and my flu shot. Why am I sick? And I just stand there with this really dopey look on my face going, maybe that's why.
There are actual publications out that show that the combination of influenza and COVID vaccines are actually more detrimental and show very little, if any, benefit. But yet they're still pushing it, just like during the pandemic where they started pushing mix and match. You had Pfizer for the first two, so take a Moderna booster. Or you had Moderna for the first two. Take a J&J. It's like, where are the studies for a medical professional to recommend such a bizarre guidance? How are they just openly saying, let's mix and match? We've never done that before. And there were so many red flags from start to finish. And that's what's happening now in the elderly in nursing homes or their physicians, because that generation, they listen to everything they're told, everything.
Yep.
And if their doc says you need flu, RSV, and COVID to be protected, and while you're at it, get a strep pneumo shot, and then you need to get your updated shingles vaccine. What kind of inflammatory cascade are you sending these elderly patients into? How is that going to be good?
Yeah. I am stunned to speechlessness, which is very difficult for me, at the ability for baby boomers to not disbelieve advertising.
I-
It is stunning. Like, I'm sitting here and I'm racking my brain. I'm like, dude, you were born in 1945. You are the generation of Woodstock, for God's sake. And somehow you trust a Pfizer ad during college football? And
They
they
don't call it programming for nothing. TV is programming, period.
it's unbelievable. It's like
Yeah.
you were the stick it to the man guy. You're sticking up for the man. I don't get it.
Yeah.
And it's just,
I think it's
wish-
their vulnerability when they reach the elderly kind of stage in life. They feel vulnerable, and they have to lean on someone that they have to trust, and that is their doctor. And their doctor becomes the TV too when you have these ads showing everybody having a blast kayaking with their Valtrex because they had a shingles outbreak, but I'm doing better. And it's just like, what can you say? I think it's become a problem. And I know during the Clinton administration, they're the ones that greenlit direct-to-consumer advertising, which I always thought was taboo. It's a terrible idea. And the US and New Zealand are the only two countries that allow it. It's banned everywhere else. But there's a reason why we're only 3 to 4% of the world's population, but we take 55% of the pharmaceutical agents. There's a reason why. We're a prime target, which is why these direct-to-consumer ads are so important, not to mention the fact that pharmaceutical companies get to control the narrative with the media now because they're paying for most of their advertising dollars. And all of that needs to end. It's all about being captured, and we need to basically put an end to that.
Yeah, I could not agree more. We're getting a little bit low on time. I do want to touch a little bit on mycoplasma because I had this, because I have been very critical of the fact that you see something with your own eyes and don't believe it because it goes against the narrative. And so I've been
Right.
criticizing these people, right? It's just people get better with certain treatments for certain disease, but somehow it can't possibly be the case, right? Somebody's inflammatory bowel disease is cured with the carnivore diet, but they're going to die of a heart attack in 15 minutes. It's no, they feel better and they lost weight. They're like, somehow this is working. So
I'm carnivore, by
zithromax-
the way.
Oh, is that right?
Yes, I am carnivore. And guess
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
I have muscle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, you do.
But this is what gets me, because lots of us that are in the outpatient world bitch and moan because patients want Z-Packs. And finally, I had the honesty to ask myself, I go, there has to be a reason for this, because they very rarely come in and ask for amoxicillin or Augmentin or another agent. They ask for a Z-Pack, and it is coast to coast, everywhere you work, so something's up. And so I'd asked my colleagues about it. I said, I think what's going on is, I think there's a little bit of evidence that it may have some antiviral effect. So that I think
Absolutely. It does. Definitely has
part of it.
antiviral. Yep.
And I think that there's so much freaking mycoplasma out there that we don't know about. So people get these chronic pharyngitis and all this stuff. I think a lot of
That's
that is
true.
mycoplasma. I might be wrong. And we treat it and they get better because we're actually killing something.
Are we back yet? It's trying to reconnect.
That's
Is that us?
that's
or-
us. I don't know what the heck happened. There we
No,
go.
it's-
You guys
Okay.
disconnected.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
did.
we
Something
did.
happened. I don't
Yeah,
know
there we
what.
go. Yeah,
Okay, but
it loses signal every once, so it's really weird. But anyways, so am I completely crazy and just a stupid country doctor, or am I onto something?
No, you're onto something, but I can understand why. I think the general population there's more access to information now. We saw a lot of people die during COVID that didn't need to die, mainly because of hospital protocols, waiting until advanced inflammatory disease, using drugs that are not appropriate during the inflammatory stage, that were only meant to lower replication rate, viral load, but used way too late. And then the sequelae of bacterial pneumonia was completely ignored because of that positive COVID test. So one Z-Pack that could have cleared it up was ignored. And these people died of pneumonia that didn't need to. And I think a lot of people are on to that, number one. Number two, it became quite prevalent of recent times that mycoplasma pneumonia, or walking pneumonia, as everybody knows it as, has become prevalent all over the country. It started in China. And I hearken back to the 80s during HIV when everybody in that community was using illicit drugs and staying up for days at a time in these bathhouses, and their immune system was shot to shit. And what ended up happening is you saw things like fungal infections, mycoplasma, all of these same things that we started seeing recently, right? Which is why what coined the term VAIDS after mRNA shots, because there was a sort of immune suppression going on. We're seeing mycoplasma explode, and the best treatment for mycoplasma is a macrolide. And a macrolide, such as azithromycin, readily available, cheap. And if it wasn't mycoplasma, there was some antiviral activity in case it was another COVID type respiratory infection. So I can see why it got into the heads of many to say, just give me a Z-Pack, I'll be fine. And for the most part, that was the case. And I know so many are worried about, oh, we're going to create resistant strains. I got to be honest, I think that's made out to be more than it truly is. And you hear many ID docs repeat the same terminology. We have to be good stewards. The word steward is always pushed forward, which means I'm not giving you an antibiotic. You've got to yuck it out. Many of these viruses cause a secondary bacterial infection. And oftentimes, because of that positive viral test, blinders go on. And it's no, you just have a virus. You got to get over it. 2 weeks later, they have pneumonia, but it's just a virus. You got to get over it. No, at this point, it's turned into a bacterial infection and we need to treat it. We can't ignore it at this point. So I think there's a combination of things. And what you're probably seeing is a lot of people that have access to a lot of information saying, you know what? I think it can't hurt. If it's mycoplasma, which many don't really test for, but I'll tell you that cough will go on and on for weeks if you don't get rid of it and you don't do some sort of Medrol dose pack or some sort of steroid, inhaled budesonide, just to get rid of it, because it'll linger and linger.
Yeah, which is good because that's largely what I've been doing.
Good.
And it's just amazing times out there. And people though are waking up, and it's very, very encouraging.
It is.
So I think I want to leave people with hope, because I think there's going to be a lot of nastiness that goes on. There's going to be a lot of fights with drug companies that don't want to give up advertising or whatever.
Absolutely.
But we're going to rip this cancer out, and that's going to be a little bit ugly, but in the end of it, it's going to be just absolutely amazing. And people, I'm amazed. I'm very careful how I navigate some of this stuff, but I'm amazed at how many people are like, yeah, you know what? I think you're right. I can't believe there's a doctor that actually thinks that way. That's my highest compliment I ever get.
That is a huge compliment. because they know. They know. So when you're
Yes.
lying to them on a regular basis, they start losing trust. And that's why, if even looking at polls now, I think trust in medical professionals and agencies are at an all-time low. And this is a problem that we need to overcome. So voices like ours need to be louder, not suppressed.
Excellent.
Absolutely. I don't know. I was going to say, you got time for a couple of fun rapid fire questions that
Sure.
are just one line answers or a sentence that are personal things?
Sure.
How about this will be fun coming from an infectious disease doc, most underrated health habit?
Underrated health habit, I would say, is proper hydration and sleep. People don't drink enough water and they don't sleep enough.
Absolutely. Totally living that right.
Yes.
I live it too. I have insomnia. It's terrible.
Oh
but
my gosh.
yeah.
Yes.
And I force myself to drink water all day, but I'm
That's
guilty.
what I have to do as
I'm
well.
guilty.
See, that's why I carry the bottle around that he gives me
Yeah, it
crap
drives me
about.
crazy.
Anyway,
Carry it around.
if you weren't in medicine or research, what would you be doing?
What would I be doing or what would I have done? Because I'd be at the end of my career, but I'd be singing opera.
No way. That's
Oh, that was a
amazing.
good one.
I love it. One thing you do every day that keeps you grounded.
Oh, I clean the litter box and wipe dogs' butts with baby wipes when they come inside.
That keeps you humble for sure and builds up your immune system.
Yes.
The natural way,
Absolutely.
right? That's the way to do it. All right. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us and on our show.
Well,
We really
thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me. Great talk.
Yes.
And you have the best Twitter or X handle ever, though.
That was one of many. I was what was it? Phineas Maximus. I was MD Fynn. I was Lynn Fynn 3. I was Finn Fan. I've been through so many names, but Finderella 1 is my current one and probably my longest standing one, even though it was banned since 2021, but I got it back in 2022. I just tried to figure out a way that people can recognize that it was me without being that obvious. But
I love it. So if people want to see what you're putting out there, they go to Finderella.
FYNNDERELLA 1 on X. I also have a Telegram account of Lynn's Fun Science and stuff. And additionally, I'm on Getter, but I'm very rarely on there. I pretty much stay on X. I'm going to probably start a Substack, even though I'm being coerced into it. But I have very little time. I'm also working very deeply with the IMA, which is the Independent Medical Alliance, formerly FLCCC. We're working on a lot of policy, working closely with the HHS department, as well as putting out really good information like we did as the FLCCC during COVID. Now we're going beyond COVID because this is a medical and health issue going forward.
Absolutely.
Perfect.
Thank you so much for what you do. And to all our listeners, if you found this conversation enlightening and helpful, which you better, I've got to say, so please subscribe, share this episode with someone that needs to hear it, and leave us a review. It really helps spread the word. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and take control of your health.